Hi, and welcome to Filmmakers Compass Podcast, show where we talk about movies and, well, more movies. I'm D-Man, joined by CP, and pretty psyched for this week's episode for one major reason, and that is CP has now seen a movie that I haven't seen, and he told me that he is going to spoil something on air. So I'm excited for that, and we're going to get into that in a second. But first, I'll throw it over to you. How you doing today, CP?
Dude, I am so excited. I think this episode is going to be a lot of fun, mostly because we're just going to nerd out for, well, a very, very long time, I'm expecting. So for those of you listening, prepare for, well, lots of nerd fandom.
Definitely. Well, before we jump into our topics today, we got to do our shout outs. So first up, I actually want to give a big shout out to my sister who started a new job this week. And I just wanted to say congratulations and good luck at the new job. I hope it is, awesome and everything you were looking for in a job. So,
I'm just
CP?
going to say you should probably tell all your new coworkers to listen to the best filmmaking podcast you've ever heard.
Yes, absolutely. So next up on my shout outs is a shout out to Lindsay Baker. She said, not trying to start anything, but, which is exactly what you would say when you're trying to start something. I have officially finished Lord of the Rings extended cuts. Well done. That gets an official 2 thumbs up from D-Man. I love it. I hope you loved it. And maybe you did. I'll read the rest of the comment here and find out. She said, Crispy has not watched a single Harry Potter movie since we made the deal, even after our late, great Robbie Coltrane, which RIP Robbie Coltrane. Damn. I didn't know this, but apparently there is a video with all of the actors who were in the Harry Potter movies and that have died. And it's like an insane number of them, like a lot. Yeah. So
Wow.
RIP Robbie Coltrane. There was a really touching video he had with, I think it was the Harry Potter reunion on HBO Max or whatever, where he basically said, he's like, these movies will outlast me. And the magic is that like my kids and kids for generations to come can still enjoy them even when I'm gone. And you're like, oh my God. But she ended that shout out saying, give him hell, D-Man. So to hell with you. Be gone.
Yeah. Wow. Feeling a lot of pressure. Got to watch like a whole crap ton of Harry Potter movies. And clearly I am not exactly motivated to do that. So I guess I got to get on it now, though. I figured it was going to take her more than like a week to watch those Lord of the Rings extended cuts. But yeah, now I got to uphold my end of the deal.
Yeah. So I hope you get to it. I actually might start watching Harry Potter just out of jealousy. I would like to watch Harry Potter myself. I've been watching Lord of the Rings in conjunction with Rings of Power. So, might as well get back to some HP and just enjoy Hogwarts, right?
Fair enough. My friend Felicia said she watches it every Christmas season as a Christmas movie. So maybe it is time for me to do the same. Get
Yeah,
on the Harry Potter train.
Get in the spirit, man. Well, I also wanted to ask you while we're doing shout outs, are you being anyone for Halloween this year? Are you dressing up?
Well, I went to a Halloween party this past weekend and I
Okay.
dressed up as the God of Thunder.
Nice. You actually have the hair for it. I mean, I feel like obviously when you grow your hair out, like you have to do something with a character who has long hair.
Yeah, that was kind of my thinking. So I was like, well, it's easy to be Thor. I have a beard, I have a hair, I have a hammer. So I just
Did you say a hair?
a hair, just one long piece of hair,
like you got a wig. I have a question. As the God of Thunder, when you took Mjolnir, you had Thor's hammer. Did you have like a replica toy version of Mjolnir, or did you like go buy a hammer?
No, I bought the more Mjolnir. I
Oh,
did
okay.
not actually go like walk around with like a 25-pound like, mini like sledge.
Yeah, you show up to a like official Halloween party, or they're like, "Sir, this is considered a weapon." You're like, "I know, got a thunder here." Um,
Yeah, right.
so I actually wanted to give a shout out. I attended a Halloween party as well, and I was Beetlejuice. So if you follow me at Big Kid D Man, you could see me in costume on my personal social media, and let me know what you think if I nailed it or not. So got to give a big shout out to Terry, Adam, Steph, and Anthony for hosting a wonderful Halloween party. Surprisingly, it rained, which is crazy. It never rains.
It actually rained at the party we were at. And the crazy thing was my buddy's band was actually playing at the party and everything was set up for outdoor, but apparently no one thought it would rain. And it made a muck of things.
Crazy. Like, I don't know. There's something about rain on Halloween. It kind of felt right.
Yeah.
Like, it reminded me of like a Midwest outdoor Halloween party, and I loved it. So it was a lot of fun. I got to give a big shout out. Name is eluding me, but I met this really cool dude at the party, and we talked, I swear, for like an hour and a half about comic books and the MCU and Star Wars and Rings of Power and all kinds of things. And it was fantastic. So shout out to you. And I hope if you tune into the show, I'd love to have you on as a guest.
I feel like you're gonna have this guy take my job, man.
He would be a good podcast guy. I'm just saying. I mean, if we ever need a third host, but why name is eluding me. I literally got the name the next day and I can't think of it. But anyway, my apologies. But also, shout out, you were awesome and the conversation was great. So I really enjoyed it. Now, finally, before we move on from shout outs, I do got to give a preemptive shout out because this is the final episode of Halloween. I am attending our annual Halloween party hosted by Johnny and Sue. One of our listeners, Mike Soto's mom, hosts a Halloween party every year, and it is absolutely amazing. So they actually just purchased a new house out in Riverside. So this is the first Halloween party they're hosting at the new house, and I can't wait to go. I will be Beetlejuice again. So looking forward to that. I'm not one of those people that like buys a different costume for every Halloween party I attend. I wear the same costume for an entire season. I don't know. Do you change it up?
It depends. You know, sometimes you go to a Halloween party, it has like a theme, you know?
Oh, that's true.
Like I went to one
that was someone else has already got your costume.
Yeah. So sometimes you got to be flexible, I guess.
Well, I'm looking forward to that party. So I think I'll actually be staying out in Riverside, maybe having a little bit too much potion, if you know what I mean. And that does it for our shout outs this week. So I wanted to just say thank you, everybody, for sending us feedback, and be sure to keep the comments coming. We love hearing from you guys, and we love keeping the dialogue going on each week's new episode. So on that note, we have to jump in to our first topic this week. I'm going to throw it over to you, CP. You saw a brand new movie and you have some thoughts. Let's hear it.
Dude, I did. For our listeners, if you've been living under a rock and didn't know, a movie featuring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson just came out. Black
well played,
Adam. And it's been very divisive on the internet, and I'm really excited to talk about it. We're just going to get this right out from the get-go. I'm going to drop a bunch of spoilers. So if you are planning to watch the movie and you're like a loser and haven't, then you probably don't want to listen to this podcast, because I'm going to totally ruin everything that's amazing about the film by dropping spoilers.
So here's the thing. I haven't seen it, so you're about to ruin it for me.
So you just leave, let me talk to the audience, and then hop back on and exactly. Headphones off, like we're good to go.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay.
All right, let's hear it.
Well, now before we really get into this, the audience may not know this because we really haven't had a lot of grounds to talk about DC films. But D-Man, you know this about me. You know I'm, in fact, a huge DC Comics fan, much bigger fan than a Marvel fan. DC has, for us fans, has been really causing a lot of conflict in our lives, because there's just such disaster, such a shit show going on over at DC and Warner Brothers, and just the colossal clash of egos that has, really driven their media for the last 5 or 6 years. So the point is, we have a new film coming out. The Rock plays Black Adam, who is essentially the villain from the Shazam comic book series. He is the bad version of Shazam. And this film was released to be a darker take on the comic book movies. Now, if you've read the critical,
DC was dark. They're dark again.
Yeah, right. The critics have hated this film. As of the last time I checked, it's around 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a bad movie. Now, when you look at the audience take on the film, it is actually 90%.
Oh,
So
that's really high. On Rotten Tomatoes, that's pretty high.
this is actually the second highest audience reviewed DC movie after the Snyder Cut Justice League, which has a 94, and this has a 90. So,
and I don't even know if Snyder Cut is a 94. That seems high, but
the point is, fans have really loved this, yet critics have really hated it. And as a comic book fan, I'm not really sure what the difference is. I don't really know why critics seem to hate it so much and fans seem to love it. It seems like it was created for comic book fans. I know I said this in the post that I did on our Instagram channel. It very much feels like the Justice League Unlimited cartoon series from the early 2000s.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool.
If you like that type of comic book movie, that's what it totally feels in line with. Maybe critics don't get the character of who Black Adam is. Maybe the fact that it's just not enough of the Marvel formula, which most critics seem to love. I don't know what it is. Maybe every reviewer in town these days works for the Disney machine as opposed to Warner Bros. I don't know. I don't know.
Sure.
Blows my mind though, the division that this has had on the internet. Now, as of the time of recording this, Warner Brothers was expecting the film to gross about 60 million over the weekend.
Okay.
Domestically, it's top 70. And when you consider the international release and the domestic release, it's around 150 million.
Wow.
Against the 200 million budget. So the film is killing it. Also, another fact that kind of blows my mind, considering that The Rock is, The Rock, one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood, Black Adam has been his highest rated opening weekend ever.
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean, The Rock has been in a lot of movies now. I mean, I still primarily think of him as, the people's champion from his WWE days. That'll always be stuck in my head. But I mean, he really is like a massive movie star.
No, he's like Arnold. He's like, the only person you can really compare him to is Arnold, in the sense that he's just a guaranteed box office draw. Now, what we got to get to is this. At the end of the movie, I mean, the film is great. I thought it was tons of fun. They bring in the JSA and introduce the characters of Dr. Fate, Hawkman, Atom Smasher. They do it in a really, I think that the introduction to Black Adam is totally true to the character. And I think for most people who are going to this movie saying, I just want to see The Rock kick ass with superpowers, you'll be very happy because that's what you get. It's kind of tonally in line with the more recent DC films, which try to mix kind of dark over the top action with kind of quirky humor. So it feels like the tone that DC seems to be wanting to set in their new film. So if you've liked some of the recent movies, namely, think Shazam, you're getting more of that. Now, the big thing that has me freaking out, has the internet freaking out, is here's the major spoiler. The mid-credit scene, Superman shows up, played by Henry Cavill.
No way. Now, played by
Henry Cavill is back as Superman. He's back.
Okay.
And,
wow.
And he posted on Instagram Monday morning his video where he said, hey, I had to hold off. I wanted to wait till everybody saw it on the weekend. I'm back as Superman. I am back. More things to come from DC. So excited to be back doing my favorite role.
That is awesome.
Now, what's crazy about this is a little bit of history of how this happened is obviously The Rock has been pushing for a Black Adam film for a while, since about 2014. The Rock has also been the most vocal supporter of Zack Snyder and the Snyder Cut version of the Justice League out of really any mainstream star in Hollywood.
Okay.
Production started, and as soon as the merger was complete between Warner Brothers and Discovery, The Rock went over everybody's head, mostly Hameda and Emmerich, the two major people within the Warner Brothers machine who were opposed to Zack Snyder's version of the Justice League. He went right over them to the new head of Discovery Warner Brothers and said, hey, we need to bring Henry Cavill back. We need him to be Superman. And they said, you know what, Dwayne, whatever you want to do, let's do it. So he is the sole reason why Superman is back with the franchise. Now,
okay, cool.
We haven't seen a lot coming out of DC. And obviously there's been the major restructuring. Everything has been pushing Black Adam, which it paid off. It's making its money back. I assume everything going forward is going to be kind of juggling this Superman, Black Adam, where are things going as we're building.
I would love to see that battle for sure.
Shazam 2, which comes out in about 3 months. And then after Shazam 2, we have the Flashpoint movie coming out a few months later. I don't think we're getting at anything definitive about a Man of Steel 2, about a Justice League 2 until after Flashpoint.
Well, the problem is Ezra Miller. So is Warner Brothers going to go through with Flashpoint? I mean, obviously, the premise of that itself lends to the concept that hypothetically you could replace that actor with someone else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that may actually be in their best interests if assuming they're going to move on from him. Although up to this point, my understanding is they haven't made any major announcements regarding Flashpoint or Ezra Miller. So who knows?
And I don't think they will. Right now, everything is going to be shifting to, Zachary Levi, Shazam 2. Like that seems to be that the vision for DC, the DC cinematic universe going forward is focusing on kind of one project at a time,
okay,
making sure there's no missteps. Now, as I said, fans are happy with this movie. Now, as a big fan, there's some stuff to look at that I actually think points to this is building in line with the Snyderverse, as I think a lot of fans want it to be.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I'm going to drop 2 pieces from the movie that if you haven't seen it, pay close attention to, and I'd love to know your thoughts on it. So the first thing is the credits of the film. As the credits start scrolling, it actually says Fourth World created by Jack Kirby. Now, Jack Kirby, his greatest contribution to DC Comics is the character of Darkseid. Jack Kirby built the Fourth World, the whole New Gods storyline that has Darkseid introduced and fighting the Justice League. Now,
okay,
there is no Darkseid in the film. Now, the only bit of Jack Kirby content in the film is essentially the film takes place in the fictional land of Kahndaq, which is the land where Black Adam comes from. It's a fictional Middle Eastern country. It is
like Wakanda.
Yeah, it's essentially the same concept, right? They are ruled currently by an international mafia / military mercenary group known as Intergang. Now, what's important about DC Comics is Intergang is actually a group of mercenaries who are supplied future weapons by the alien overlord Darkseid. So these are Darkseid minions on Earth, which, again, in line with a potential, Darkseid Justice League showdown that the Snyderverse led us to believe is coming. Now, the other major thing is in the film, Dr. Fate, who is, if you don't really know your DC Comics, he is DC's version of Doctor Strange, the Mystic, who can see into the future. Okay. And he does lead a very valuable line of dialogue in the film where he says to Hawkman, he says, the world needs the Justice League and the Justice League need Hawkman. Now, again, we're reading into it a little bit much, but as a fan, I can't help but believe that the reason why we need Justice League is because Darkseid's coming. So,
all right. I mean, that would be really cool. A true extension of the actual Snyderverse. Absolutely.
And the fact that we know that The Rock himself has been such a vocal supporter of Zack Snyder, I can't help but think that he is doing everything he can to build a cohesive DC universe, which, if you look at the moves DC is making, right? They're canning projects that they just don't think really are going to strengthen the brand. So, I mean, I'd love to know your thoughts. I'd love you got to see the movie and tell me what you think.
Well, I plan on seeing the movie. So, I mean, obviously, I don't know how long I could have gone with escaping the spoilers, especially Henry Cavill as Superman in the film. I know that's gonna show up. I think most fans give, we're recording this at the beginning of a new week. They usually give a few days of like kind of being respectful,
Yeah.
so it doesn't just randomly pop up in your feed. But after that, all bets are off. Like if you're scrolling through, Reels, Shorts, or TikTok or something, it's gonna pop up. So I fully expect to see it. I do want to check out the movie. I am obviously interested in what kind of WB or Discovery WB is going to do because they have overhauled a ton of shit since Discovery came in.
Oh yeah, no, it's insane. I mean, restructuring, creating essentially an entire cinematic department to oversee the just the DC cinematic vision, cutting projects, greenlighting new projects. I mean, there's been so much. If you're a DC fan, it kind of makes your head spin just all the changes that have happened in the last 2 years. Projects announced, canceled, re-greenlit, other things. I mean, movies finished that they pulled the plug on and decided not to release. It's really crazy. And
yeah, it actually is crazy because you think, I mean, even movies that are completed that they're just deciding not to release. Like, what would possibly prevent you from just being like, you know what, put it on a streaming platform and just call it?
yeah, right.
But I don't know, So I'm interested to see what they do and how this all ties together. I am with you. I hope that there is some overall, cohesive vision behind this. There is a plan and that this all actually does tie together in a unique way at some point. That would be very rewarding for a lot of people who have stuck with DC despite, a lot of the criticism. Interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing Black Adam now. I think your take on it is definitely something that fits that narrative of critics not aligning with fans, which is, sometimes critics are looking at it like, oh, we've seen this before. Oh, it's formulaic. It's this and that. But if you're a comic book fan, you show up, you're like, this was great. I had a lot of fun watching this movie.
Yeah, I would love to know, once you see it, you got to let me know. But for our listeners, if you've seen Black Adam, what do you think of it? Do you agree with the critics? Do you think that it just is another misstep by DC? Or do you agree with me and some of the other fans that I've talked to that really see this as the direction they should be going, leaning into their strengths and making content that resonates with the fans?
Interesting. Well, that takes us to our next discussion topic. And we actually alluded to this on last week's episode. But Rings of Power Season 1 has officially concluded. And we did an episode before the show started at the midpoint. And now we're going to do one after everyone's had time to watch the whole season about all of Season 1. So let's start off by just, did you actually like the show? Because there's a large contingent of Tolkien fans and in general Lord of the Rings fans that did not enjoy the show in a general sense. What did you think?
First off, just reminding our audience, we are going to be spoiling Rings of Powers as well. Thanks. So, as though, no one knows what's actually going to happen down the line with, Rings of Power corrupting people. But hey, we will be, talking about big reveals. So, as a fan, overall, I enjoyed the series. I mean, I've made it, my opinion has been known throughout the course of this as we've recorded our podcast. It was very slow to find footing for me, but for the most part, it ended at a point that I'm going to watch season 2. I'm looking forward to it. It's obviously not what I was hoping it would be when I heard we're spending $1 billion making a Lord of the Rings show, but I think it managed to hobble together enough story and we've become invested in the characters enough that I was happy with it. I'm not like one of the fans who's like never going to watch again.
I actually really enjoyed it. as far as like, a fantasy epic goes, I thought it does a lot of things really well. Like, obviously, I get it. There's literally videos on YouTube where people like watch the episode with like a little box of themselves like in the corner, or the opposite, like just like I look now on the screen, and then in the little corner is like freeze frames from different segments of each episode. And they just are like literally just like criticizing everything about the show. So I do understand it's not a perfect show. There are some, illogical decisions. There's, not all the dialogue was Shakespearean. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't perfect all the way through, but in terms of now having the first season completed, did I enjoy the ride? I did.
Yeah.
I like where it got to, but I do have a couple things that I will talk about, and I'm not going to nitpick here. These are more like big overarching things that were interesting to me, and that is the decision to leave the reveals to the finale. So why I find that interesting is because essentially you have the main question powering all the fan discussions offline for people who are actually enjoying the show, which is, who is Sauron?
Yeah.
So is he a character that we've met within the show so far? Is he someone that's out there and we haven't seen him yet? And the consensus generally was that we would meet him in the season 1 finale, and the consensus was that he is most likely one of the characters we have met in the show. So the 4 options being the Stranger or Meteor Man, Halbrand, there's those white cloaked figures, and who was the other one? There's one more. It's eluding me. But whatever, I'll think of it. But anyway, yeah, everybody was like, okay, so Adar. So everybody was like, is Adar Sauron? And we ended up getting the answer to our question. So who is Sauron? Spoiler alert. Yeah, we're gonna ruin it right now. It is Halbrand. So
No.
he is Sauron. And I don't know, one of the things that bugs me a little bit about this whole thing, and essentially we can clarify who all of those people are. The white cloaked figures are Sauron worshippers with some sort of associated power. It appears that the Meteor Man, the Stranger, is clearly, he is 100% Istari. He is a wizard. He says the word wizard, and it's very heavily implied that he is indeed Gandalf, which I believe to be true. There is a quote at the end of the last episode where he says, "If in doubt, follow your nose."
Which he
And
says in the Fellowship of the Rings.
yeah, so I want to say that's literally the tip of the cap. Like, it is Gandalf. So, and then Adar is one of the first elves that was turned into an orc. And that's kind of his backstory. He's, essentially a fallen elf. So that was, I mean, he may even actually be against Sauron. I'm not even 100% sure. It sounded like he kind of was. I don't know if they're fully aligned there, but I have a feeling they're going to line up. I mean, Sauron's pretty powerful. So if you don't fall in line, you're dead.
Yeah.
But
I know what you're referring to, that the episode where the Southlanders go to pledge their allegiance to Sauron, and he looks at them like, what the hell are you doing?
yeah. So my big gripe then is, because they withhold these reveals to the finale, it feels like there's a certain emptiness to the arcs of some of the characters, because we're holding off for the surprise reveal. The number one person I think this affects is the Stranger or the Meteor Man. It feels like he is not revealed to be Istari or a wizard earlier on in the show, simply to keep all the characters on the board who could potentially be Sauron. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, honestly, other than like the second episode, Nori kind of is one of the Harfoots, is interacting with him, but she trusts him kind of instinctively. She trusts him. And he clearly doesn't know how to manage his powers, and he's learning how to speak and all this stuff, right? Over the course of an entire season. But by the end, if you actually look at like his arc, I mean, he's basically like, he could have figured all this out really freaking quick. And, at the end of the season, he's basically in the exact same spot, still with the Harfoots, hasn't gone anywhere, and he's finally leaving. I feel like that's a little bit of like wasted time. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, where he gets in the finale is where he should have been in like the second or third episode. Like now he's going off on his quest as an individual. He's finally learned how to speak. He's learned a little bit about his powers. He's exploring Middle Earth. I think that they could have set him on that path sooner and had his through his interactions with the rest of Middle Earth, we could have questioned what his true purpose is, right?
Yeah.
They could have kept playing that could this be Sauron game. Um it's just it felt like, you know, they didn't do anything with him.
Well, and the other disconnect, so that's one of, is I feel like some of the I'm not going to get into every single character, but that's an example of what I'm talking about. But the idea of withholding who Sauron is, the other thing that I thought was a little bit odd is obviously the writers are playing with the question, who is Sauron, with the audience, right? But the actual characters in show do not seem to suspect that anybody except maybe the Meteor Man could potentially be Sauron. And that's only by the cloaked white figures. And it's a total misdirect, which again feels a little bit cheap to me. But in essence, right, nobody in story suspects that Halbrand could be Sauron. The Harfoots do not suspect that Meteor Man could be Sauron. Even the white hooded figures, I mean, we basically only know about them because they appeared in the trailer. Like, for the most part, they show up at the end of the season and barely do anything. It's literally like they're there for simply, in my opinion, they're there for a misdirect to just make us think that he could be Sauron. And then Adar basically says he's not. You know, I mean, again, he could be lying. Sauron's deceitful, but generally speaking, I mean, I think everybody was like, it's not him.
Yeah.
So it was weird because I think the show might be stronger if you actually had the characters in the story trying to figure out who Sauron is. And you had mentioned this in our pre-production meeting, that the way it's positioned is for the characters, Sauron is just out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Almost, they're not like following clues and like trying to uncover who it could be. So it doesn't feel like the story itself, who is Sauron, has a lot of agency in the actual story.
Well, considering that
it's just us. It's us as the audience that has agency around it, but the characters don't seem to. And I think that's a disconnect. I think it's a slight disconnect for the overall season arc.
Well, considering that the story, you know, the series starts out with Galadriel hunting Sauron, looking for proof, right? Believing that he is still out there and his followers are still out there and trying to hunt down the remnants of his forces. And I guess I think if it was to be redone, I think it would have been more interesting had they truly leaned into Sauron is still here. He could be anyone, you know, almost position it like Scream.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's the killer? Well, if all the characters were suspicious of all the people around them, then we could have not just within world lots of conflict created because
who do you trust? Who do you not trust?
Right. And on top of it, as an audience, you could have a lot more fun with us. Is each episode we're like, nope, this person has to be Sauron. No, now this guy has to be Sauron. We could totally play that who is Sauron game that I thought they were setting us up to, that never really manifested. I mean, because when you think about it, you know, the regent who assists the queen, you know, his nephew or whoever within Numenor, like there's all these other characters who are kind of populated and are skeptical and seem to be at odds with Galadriel. You could have really sort of positioned them to be, is this Sauron? Is this Sauron? And this is his way of infiltrating, you know, the actions of and influencing the direction of the world.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think a great example of, you know, a narrative that is able to do that successfully is, and Sean will love this this mention, but if you go back to the early seasons of 24, right away they're like, there's a mole in, you know, the agency.
That's a good example.
And now the characters, they don't know who they can trust. They don't know who's listening. They don't know, right? So it just creates all of this tension. And, Jack Bauer, obviously we know, he's our hero. So we know we can at least trust Jack. But from there, almost no one.
Well, in right, the same thing could have played out in this. As Lord of the Rings fans, we know who Elrond is. We know who Galadriel is. We know that we can trust them as noble elves, right?
Yeah.
Who have fought to defeat Sauron in the Second Age, and who fight to defeat Sauron in the Third Age.
Right.
We know that we can count on them.
We know they're not. Yeah.
But let's make everyone else be a potential, the potential mole.
So I don't know. I think that would have been interesting, and you could have had a little bit more fun, a little bit more agency with that with that question in story. Like I said, I think because it's a prequel and because they don't own the rights to technically all the characters, I think they only got like the Lord of the Rings and the appendices. They didn't actually get the rights to like the Silmarillion or whatever. So I think obviously they're toying with the idea that yes, some of these characters are allusions to characters from the Silmarillion, but like essentially we get to create characters and you don't know who they are within this world, right? And they're unique to this show and this telling of Tolkien lore. And they're playing with that idea. It didn't feel like it had enough agency within the story itself. Just Sauron is just out there somewhere. And I think there should have been early on an announcement that maybe Sauron is back, and we don't know who he is, but he's here.
Exactly. Exactly.
That would have been maybe a little bit more exciting, created a little bit more tension.
Fair enough.
So to that end, I did also want to say though that like, I'm also not a person who demands that when works of art are being adapted to another medium that you have to follow the books to the T. For me personally, I know like a good example is just the Lord of the Rings. Like Peter Jackson adapted the Lord of the Rings, but it is adapted for movies, for film. The story itself is, converted into something that is more digestible in a 2-hour window. It works really well for the medium of film. But did a lot of things get cut from Lord of the Rings? Sure. You got Tom Bombadil is gone. The actual story structure, Lord of the Rings is structured by kind of books within books, and they start cutting between scenes and telling the story. It's still linear, but they're jumping around. And I don't know, it's interesting because there are a lot of Tolkien fans, especially on YouTube and everywhere, where like if they don't follow the Tolkien lore like literally to the letter, they're pissed off. And that's not me. I'm just saying. Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's funny. When I was at Comic-Con, I was talking to an author, comic book series, The Untamed. The author is Sebastian Jones. And it's actually a really great comic book series if you get the chance to check it out. He was saying how he was working with a television studio to develop the comic book series into a television series. And at first he was saying how, I'm all about keeping the integrity of my work. Like I put in all the time into making this. He said, and then I realized that when you convert a comic book into a screenplay, this full volume, issue 1 turns into like 5 pages of a screenplay, and suddenly you say, shoot, this is a problem, right?
Yeah.
This isn't enough. When we transfer from one medium to another, things can't just be transposed perfectly. So he said, so suddenly my opinion changed on the fact that works change when the medium that they're presented in changes. And I think that's a really good way to think about it because, if we did a Lord of the Rings series that was exactly like the Lord of the Ring novels, it would probably be one book would be like 5 seasons of a television series, and it would be parts of it would be really, really slow.
Yeah. And isn't there a beauty in when you have different mediums, even though you have an original author? And when we do have adaptations, we want to definitely try to include the integrity of the story and the heart of the story, right? We don't want to alter arcs too far, but at the same time, isn't there something beautiful about the fact that you can enjoy the Lord of the Rings, the movies, and then you can go enjoy the books, and it's like a different experience?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for one, if the movies were perfect adaptations of the books, no one would ever have to read the books. And
Exactly. I don't want that.
Yeah.
And another good example of that is our modern era Harry Potter. Oh, CP.
feel
You
like
gotta
feel
go
like
go
feel like you planned on that.
giving you hell, man. Go watch Harry Potter. And that's a great example though. Like they don't fit everything from the books into the movies, and you can't. And let's say, the movies. I know a lot of people who have seen Harry Potter the movies and never read the books, so it brought in fans. But if you read the books, there's so much more there and so much more world building and all this stuff than you can ever fit into the movies, and it makes the books special. So, even looking at something like Marvel is a good example. I think we'll go ahead and just call out the story arc, Civil War.
Oh, I
right?
love Civil War. The
But
comic book
it's
series is
nothing.
amazing.
But the MCU version is nothing like
Mhm.
Civil War in the comics. It's an adapted arc that fits the narrative of where the MCU is at in at that time.
Yeah.
But it's by no means like, are they pulling specific, panels out? They're not even really using, direct quote bubbles or anything. Like, they're taking the concept of having a Marvel Civil War and applying it. The Infinity War is kind of the same way, where it's like, no, it's not an adaptation of the exact comic arc. Now, Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings, and Harry Potter are much closer to their original works than the comic book variations. But I'm just saying, though, that like I think when you're doing adaptations, that's something to just always keep in mind, is that, we can get another Lord of the Rings trilogy down the road, and it might not look anything like Peter Jackson's. That's kind of the fun of adaptations. So I don't know. I'm not here to like criticize Rings of Power in any way that is disputing most of Tolkien lore. I think they did a pretty good job. It reminded me of Middle Earth. I have mentioned I've read The Hobbit. I have read Lord of the Rings. I've never read The Silmarillion, although I do love reading about the history of Middle Earth and Tolkien and all that online. I love the good debates, and there's fun, dude. If you ever get a chance, there's some really good YouTube videos that'll just cover the history of Middle Earth. It's actually great. But no, I haven't personally read The Silmarillion. But yeah, so to that end, I think the show worked pretty good. It kept me entertained. I enjoyed where it's going. I think the only question I have going forward is, how do I put it? Rings of Power, because it's adapting kind of history from Middle Earth, the Second Age of Man, right? Or this the Second Age of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
It has the potential to kind of play as kind of like a History Channel reenactment of like World War II, where are we going to get like these really powerful narrative arcs? Are we going to dig in a little bit deeper on these characters? Because I could see watching like a History Channel reenactment of something like the Revolutionary War, and then you check the box, right? Like, oh, there's George Washington. But do we get any insight into him beyond what we already know about his, historical contributions to that time period? Or, are we just watching them kind of check the boxes? There's nothing wrong with that. That can be fun in its own right. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, going forward, are we looking at a show that's going to introduce characters with the complexity of, Walter White, or, even some of the Game of Thrones characters? Are we going to get into those complexities, or is this more of like a historical recap of Middle Earth?
Well, and again, I think that's always the risk that you run when you air a prequel series to an existing piece of content, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we look at Star Wars, I'll make the Star Wars reference this episode, right?
Yeah.
Part of the failure in the prequel series is we already know what's going to happen. We know the Republic falls. We know Palpatine rises to power. And we know that Anakin Skywalker falls to the dark side. Yeah. So, I mean,
spoilers there too.
So yeah, like it's just, so as an audience member going in, it's, it's really hard for a storyteller to make it compelling when the audience already knows how it's going to end.
Yeah, and then you also have the trouble with stakes, right? So Galadriel, Elrond, what's it called? Obviously Gandalf, Sauron. There's a bunch of characters. I don't need to go.
We know that they all survive until the third age of Middle Earth.
Right. We know they're all going to make it. So you need to derive tension within the show if you're going to have, characters with kind of deep arcs or big arcs and all that. So I don't know. I'm just interested in how they want to do this going forward because, I love watching World War II documentaries and History Channel reenactments. I used to watch, what was it? It's called Making of the Mob. Shout out Mike Soto. And they just go over the history of like how the mob was formed. And you got these, like this narrator and they're just showing you how it happened. It was very entertaining.
Yeah.
But I mean, it doesn't dig too deep, right?
Yeah.
But it was like a great show. You saw, all the boxes you're like, oh, there's Bugsy. And like,
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that now they're talking about how Las Vegas got, funded and all this stuff. It worked well. I don't think there's anything wrong with something like that. It's just, I'm interested because the way Amazon Prime kind of pitched this was they were going to put $1 billion behind it and whatever time they need to develop and do all this stuff. The impression that it gave me was that they did want those type of characters.
Yeah.
That's what they were going for. So we didn't necessarily get a lot of that in terms of overall arcs. There are reveals at the end, but in terms of characters, really transforming by the end of season 1, it's not a whole lot, if you ask me.
No, I agree. And I almost wonder if part of the problem is that season 1 is set up us kind of waiting on two or three major pieces of story to be revealed. And one of them is who is Sauron, right?
Yeah.
There's also what is the fate of the Southlands, which again, we know what that is down the line. What's the fate of Numenor, which again, we know what that is down the line. And so the only other really thing is Galadriel able to reconcile the elves' relationship with the men, and is she able to reunite herself and with the elves? And I mean, the whole story is set up on kind of a couple major premises that we already kind of know what happens. And I feel like, again, I think we talked about this last time we talked about the episode. Maybe if the approach to the show had been different, I think it might have worked better. Again, I like what Peter Jackson does. Granted, he doesn't, I know, as we said, people were frustrated when Peter Jackson took the realm, but the decision he made with the Lord of the Rings film is let's start small and go bigger. And we'll introduce characters as we go bigger and bigger and bigger through this massive, magical, mystical world of Middle Earth.
That's a really good point.
And I still think that, there's all these major political and storylines going on. And then we keep cutting back to this Harfoot storyline that seems so insignificant. And I almost think that had we started out with the meteor man falling from the sky, not knowing who the stranger is, him connecting with the Harfoot, and by the end of the first episode, leaving the Harfoot to go into Middle Earth, right?
Yeah. Interesting.
And as we follow this character that we don't know if he's good or bad, we start to find all these other pieces in play involving the politics of Numenor, the fate of the tribes of men in the West, Gladriel trying to convince everybody that Sauron is still out there and still a threat. I think that if we had encountered those more naturally, than all these storylines being laid out in the beginning and just sort of waiting for them to connect, I feel like it maybe would have been a more compelling journey for us as an audience.
That's a good point. And obviously, like I said earlier, I think it would also push the Meteor Man into having more agency in his own story. I feel like most of the time he's just like accidentally killing fireflies, because he didn't
Yeah.
know what he was doing, you know. And
Well, and I mean, the other thing that I thought was a shame was one of my favorite storylines was the Elron Durin
Durin,
storyline, and it kind of happens, I think, on the second episode, and it sort of wraps up, I think, in the
second to last.
Yeah. And again, I'm like, this is a really compelling, this is one of the few stories that we don't know a lot about from our future knowledge of Lord of the Rings and looking back at this time period. But on top of it, we're getting dwarves, we're getting elves, we're getting all this cool Middle Earth, culture and the fun parts of reading Tolkien and looking at this world. And I didn't like the fact that it's clearly like a C tier storyline for the writers.
Okay. I mean, yeah, the show, like, I think everybody definitely agrees that, like, the opening sequence with sound kind of forming, rings of power was pretty cool. The budget clearly shows. Most of it looks beautiful, really good. It's visually, it's eye candy. It's easy to watch. I don't know. I heard a lot of complaints about, like, the acting and certain elements. I didn't really have any major complaints, and no one ever really ruined it for me.
No, I didn't really have any issues. I mean,
I'd like, you know me, I would like to see somebody create some more recognizable theme music.
Yeah, you're not
like,
a Bear McCreary fan, not at all.
No, I like themes. I should, this is Rings of Power. This is Lord of the Rings. I should come away humming something.
Yeah.
Tell me you didn't leave Fellowship of the Ring and you're like, dun, 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 dun,
no, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, there's so many iconic pieces of music in the original trilogy.
Yeah, so I don't know. That was something that I was hoping maybe we could get a few more recognizable themes would have been great.
The other complaint I have, and granted, this is probably the curse of Peter Jackson doing Lord of the Rings. And I know this was one of the initial complaints, right? Is Tolkien purists at the time criticized him for putting too much action into the story and not enough of the other elements of it. He spends half of the Two Towers at the Battle of Helm's Deep, which is like 2.5 pages in the actual text. But I think that part of the translation from pages to screen is you need to embrace those type of things. And I think that after experiencing Peter Jackson's version of the Lord of the Rings, I think as fans, we would have liked to see a little bit more of kind of the epic nature of that, which we kind of only really get in sort of the one episode between when Numenor arrives to fight Andor and the orcs. And I would have liked a little bit more of that.
What about the actual Rings of Power? So they finally make an appearance at the end of the finale. So essentially, Halbrand is I don't know what you call it, something smith. I don't know.
Yeah, Smith.
Whatever. Yeah, he's so he can create rings, and he knows how to, like, put all these different elements together. Now this tracks, I think his name is Anatar in the Silmarillion, the giver of gifts. And they do a tip of the cap to that when he, like, basically tells the elves, like, hey, why don't you try this? And he's like, oh, that's amazing. Like, why are you telling us this? And he's like, consider it a gift. But essentially, it is called the Rings of Power, and there is no mention of really any rings until the finale. And that's when we get the first concept that there are these rings of power. And I think, ironically, they call them crowns. They're looking for something that's circular in shape, and they don't know they're going to be rings yet. But
yeah, they say they're going to make one crown for the high elf.
Yeah, something like that. And then they end up saying, like, which was kind of cool. They're like, one person can be just corrupted by power, 2 divides, 3 will keep everybody kind of in check. Very Triforce from Zelda. But I don't know. What do you think? Because, going back into, like, Tolkien lore and knowing that, like, essentially, and this happens, Galadriel does make mention that the elven rings should be, crafted without the influence of Halbrand / Sauron, because she knows that he could potentially have incredibly devious motives, which he does. But we only get 3 rings of power. So obviously, if you know Lord of the Rings lore, there is the 1 ring, 3 rings given to the elves, 7 to the dwarves, and 9 to men. So we know that men become corrupted and become the Nazgul. The dwarves, it enhances certain qualities like their greed. And the elven rings, while not influenced by the 1 ring, do have some special abilities, and they even make an appearance in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What did you think? Like, it all kind of builds to the first rings coming. Did you think they did it well? I mean, does it still seem like it's all building towards Sauron going to Mount Doom and forging the 1 ring?
I mean, it definitely does. I think my question is, I don't know why. I understand it's called the Rings of Power, but I don't know that we needed the Rings of Power forged in season 1. I think we could have waited on it. I think this is a story about how the Rings of Power came to be. This is essentially the ultimate weapon of mass destruction.
Okay.
We don't need to see it created now. What we need is to lay the foundation for why they're built. And I feel like in some way, like the whole elf thing with the tree and the elves' power, declining. I feel like that was all really just kind of shoved in there. And I feel like we could have drawn that out a little bit more and really pushed to the fact that the elves need this or they cannot stay. Right.
Okay. So making them more desperate, having to really make the decision to make the rings maybe one of selfish necessity and not like, oh, cool. I didn't know we could do this.
Yeah. I feel like, I guess I think that there could have been an interesting storyline watching the decline of elvish power concurrent with the rise of Sauron in the West. Right.
Yeah,
both of these things, we see the creation of Mordor. Well, if the elves aren't strong enough, then that's a real problem. Right. And I feel like since we didn't really spend enough time with why do we need these? And, I mean, because we didn't need, as long as the rings are forged at some point during, the next, during the 5 seasons of the series, you can call it the Rings of Power. That's fine.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, as long as they make an appearance. And obviously, not all the rings were forged. The main one being the 1 ring to rule them all. Sauron's ring of power. So we still have that to come. And I know that may not even happen in season 2, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how all of that does indeed play out. But again, some of those elements do feel a little bit more like the, kind of History Channel reenactment, checking the box on some of those things.
Yeah.
How, like you said, how is it going to be incredibly compelling, or, do you just want to check boxes? That's cool too.
Yeah.
But I will say, as far as season 1 goes, they did do a good job of introducing us to the world, the Second Age. And all of, the chess pieces are kind of on the board. We know Gandalf and the Astari are here. The wizards are here.
Yep.
We kind of know the Harfoots. I don't know exactly how all that lineage will play out, but, we have kind of the pre-Hobbits. We have Galadriel and Elrond and Elendil and Isildur, who will all be at the final battle. Actually, I'm assuming Galadriel will be there, although in the Lord of the Rings adaptation, I don't know if she was there physically, but I assume in this show she'll probably.
Oh, she's a badass in this show. She'll definitely be there.
Yeah, I assume she'll make an appearance. And then obviously Sauron is here. We were introduced to a few places that we know are going to be destroyed, including one elven city, Numenor, and Khazad-dûm, as well as the Balrog was alluded to.
Okay, so that is one of my gripes with the show. We see the Balrog. Like the leaf falls down. We're like, this is about to be awesome. And then they're just like, oh, we were just messing with you. Like, we're not actually going to go back to that. And I wanted to see more.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, hopefully that'll hook you in for season two. But all these things, right? The Southlands, in the first episode, we don't know quite yet, although the mountain does loom large in one of the shots, that this is going to become Mordor. It is now Mordor.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that happen within season one that definitely put the places, or put the pieces in the right places. So hopefully, I'm interested to see what the writers say about their intentions for seasons 2 through 5, and two
Mm-hmm.
in particular. I just wish, however they decide to do it, if they're going to present this as, hey, we're going to create a show that just kind of is going to follow the history of the second age of Middle Earth. Like, that's fine. That's cool. But if their intention is to, go deeper and explore some of these characters and their motives and their shortcomings, because obviously, just like a lot of prequels, we end in, uh, a really kind of dark place.
Mm-hmm.
What do they do? So,
So, question for you.
sure.
Is there the possibility that Sauron has been more than one character throughout this story so far?
I would say absolutely that is possible. So clearly, Halbrand was the reveal, and I know that they're sticking with that because I think one of the last shots of the final episode was him walking into Mordor, still looking like Halbrand.
Well, and we know that he has to be because the king of the we know the lineage that Isildur is, right?
Yeah, and we know eventually, like I think him and his father Elendil set up two cities, one of them being Gondor, that will obviously play a huge role in Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I very much got the impression that he can change his appearance,
Mm-hmm.
and that he could have been any number of people at any specific time. Meaning, interestingly enough, that Galadriel probably won't even know it's him if she meets him again.
Good point. Good
So
point.
I think that's very possible. Now, from a storytelling, like a narrative standpoint, I mean, it does make sense to, kind of not constantly be having to ask the question, who is Sauron?
Mm-hmm.
They kind of went through that. We already did it. So I don't know what benefit that brings, but it is interesting, as his character, because as Halbrand, he clearly doesn't look like Sauron from the prologue of Lord of the Rings, or even the prologue
No.
of Rings of Power.
Yeah, right.
So like he doesn't look like that. So, you know, obviously he can change his appearance.
I thought another interesting thing was I want your read on this, right? In the finale, when Elrond finds Galadriel in the water, right?
Yeah.
And so to test him, she asks him about the first time they met, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, that's not really effective if Sauron has the ability to read her mind to the point that he could place himself within her memories of her brother. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that if that's actually Sauron, he could just be messing with you still, right?
Yeah.
Like the power that he had taking her through these different, memories of hers, and she goes from one place to the other. I'm like, how do you know that he's still not?
Yeah, right. Galadriel, you're still in limbo.
Yeah, right.
You don't know where you are. So yeah, I don't know if you could fully trust that. Interestingly enough, I wonder to what extent Sauron's powers, could make somebody question reality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's quite a power.
Because again, he's all powerful, yet we haven't really seen the extent to his power. I mean, honestly, even within the original trilogy, his power is alluded to, and we know the power that he possesses, that they tell us he possesses once he's at full form. But Sauron's powers are very much a mystery to us as an audience.
Well, that, and I think this was one of the bigger kind of plot holes in the show, but in the finale, right? Sauron kind of goes into Galadriel's memories, right? I mean, the big question is like, why didn't he just kill her?
True.
Like, he leaves her, like she's in water, and like, but if he has all this power, I mean, why is he like running away?
Well, like, and maybe this is what you're getting at. Maybe we're actually posed to see a very character-driven look at Sauron, who essentially embodies evil in its purest form. Yet, I mean, we've talked about this before. It is interesting that when they meet on the raft the first time, he tells her looks can be deceiving. He reminds her multiple times through the story when she says, "You made me do this and this and this," and he said, "I never made you do anything." Right?
Yeah.
Like, he's a very interesting, like in many ways, the seeds of a very interesting character are being planted, which is, if he is straightforward in some of these moments, while at the same time he is this master deceiver who is playing everyone behind the scenes, we could be in for a very interesting ride following this character of Sauron and his re-rise to power.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see it. Like I said, almost all the characters are on the board. There's probably a few that are missing, but generally speaking, a lot of people are here. They're in play. So hopefully with, we know Amazon is behind this. So we're getting seasons 2 through 5. I'm hoping they can deliver on some of the premises here.
Yeah, I agree.
It was a good start. It was a good start. I think it got people excited for Lord of the Rings. Was it a perfect show? It was not. So, I can, we can sit here, and I don't want to just like rewatch every episode and question every motive throughout. But, like I said, there's definitely some things that it was like, okay, could have been an easy fix, or like, can you just like remove this? Whatever. But I enjoyed it. I'll give Rings of Power, I'm going to give it probably, in this case, like a solid 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. It's not approaching really like the best shows, but it was solid. I enjoyed watching it. So I've actually seen most of the episodes now a couple times. So if that speaks to how much I enjoyed it.
All right. Good job. No, I'd agree. I think I'd probably give it about a 7 out of 10 too. There's much to be desired, but at the same time, this is season 1. They do get a bit of a pass in the sense that they're building the world, and they did an amazing job. It's a beautiful, massive interpretation of Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth. And I'm excited to I hope now that the pieces are set, we know who's a good guy for the most part and a bad guy for the most part. I'm hoping that we can really get into some more interesting dynamics and characterization.
Yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to all you Tolkien loyalists. While I am maybe being a little light here on criticism for Rings of Power, I do fully understand your plight. And to that end, I do want to just bring up that, I understand, right? Disney bought Star Wars for $4 billion. They wanted to be able to slap Star Wars on some movies and, sell merchandise and do all the stuff. But, when I went to go see the new sequel trilogy, I'm like, no offense, but you're putting Star Wars on it. And my favorite movie of all time is Star Wars: A New Hope. So, the bar is high. It's best movie of all time. So I'm not saying like, hey, you have to like pass that bar and make something better than my favorite movie. I'm just saying that, you wanted the right to be able to put, in this case, Lord of the Rings. Amazon could have easily created their own new unique world, their own fantasy epic that is wholly unique to Amazon Prime. But they wanted Lord of the Rings. And I get it, Tolkien fans. If you want to slap Lord of the Rings on there and you want me to be a fan of it, the bar is high. It's like the best fantasy epic ever written. So, I'm not here to knock or excuse some of the stuff. I just trying to, express that I really did enjoy the show. I'm looking forward to the future of the show. And while not perfect, it was something that I really enjoyed watching it. So that's why it gets a 7.
Fair enough. I think you're right, though. Just to comment on the point you just made, right? Like, in the same way Disney complains about Star Wars fans complaining about their content, Amazon, you spent $1 billion to buy existing IP. The gift is you have the rights to make this amazing thing that, people love and, people are going to spend money to see and be a part of. But with that comes the curse of they love it. They know their fandom. They know this medium. They know the history of this world. And, they're going to set a high bar, and they should. And if you can't deal with it, then, go make your knockoff of Lord of the Rings and be happy with it. This isn't, you're not buying some obscure indie comic book. Like, you're buying Lord of the Rings, and what you get with it is a diehard loyal fan base. So you better show up, and put up, or you're going to get exactly what you got. And I hope that Amazon looks at the criticisms that they had and going into season 2, do their best to rectify where they can.
And I think they will. I think it'll be good. I mean, obviously, like we said, production quality's there. The bar can be raised, which is great. So there's room for improvement, and they got a lot of time and a lot of talented people behind the scenes. So I do, want to give 2 thumbs up for Rings of Power from D-Man. I actually really enjoyed the show, and am looking forward to more. So keep it coming.
Hey, and let us know what you thought. Do you hate the series now that it's wrapped up? Are you excited for season 2? Let us know.
All right. Well, that does it for our show this week. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to drop us comments or leave us a 5-star review. Thank you in advance, and help us rank a little bit higher in the algorithm, boost up that engagement. But more than that, we love hearing from you guys. So we love all your feedback, and, it's fun to go through our shout outs and engage with you guys. So you can follow everything about the show at filmmakerscompass.com. And you can also follow me at Big Kid D-Man.
You can follow me at NDCal5. You guys make sure you have an awesome, safe Halloween. Make some good choices out there.
Keep watching movies. We'll be back.